What's up, everybody? So today I want to talk about my process for planning a travel photography trip on a budget. Been doing this for a while, so I have my system pretty down, and I'm going to be talking about your key expenses, which are going to be plane tickets, booking and finding reservations, transportation when you get to your location, lodging, where you're going to be staying, and food. These are going to be your 4 key expenses pretty much anywhere that you travel. Now, to begin, you might have an idea in mind of where you want to go. Or like me, I usually kind of see what is out there and plan my trip accordingly. It's usually the best way if you're flexible as far as at least where you're going and you have some range of dates that you would like to plan your trip for. So to start out, I'll check out some of these deal or flight deal apps. The one that I tend to look at is called Hit List. So that's a phone app. And I'll open up the app right now and we'll take a look. I haven't done any pre-planning. We're just going to open the app up and select some dates. I usually select something about 2 months out is a good range, minimum a month, but 2 months out we'll select something around that date range and we'll just take a look and see what we can find on Hit List. The app allows you to select specific dates or specific destinations and gives you the best prices for trips within those ranges. I'm just going to select dates for now. My trips tend to be 10 days or 2 weeks at least. So we're gonna search for something at the end of February. Another little tip is to fly out and in during the week. You'll find cheaper flights that way. So I have my date selected here, February 27th to the 9th of March, and apply that filter and we'll see what we find. The first flight deals that show up, of course, are gonna be local. There might be some specific places within your country that you want to visit, and of course you'll find those deals here, but I tend to lean towards more international destinations, so we'll scroll down and see what we find. So for these specific dates, there isn't a huge range, but I'm seeing some pretty good deals for South America, India, Mexico, and London. That's pretty cheap to fly across to London, under $400. Can't argue with that. For the purpose of this example, we're going to look at these 2 destinations, London and Mexico. From here, we're going to hop onto the computer. There's 2 websites that I mainly use, Skyscanner and Skiplagged, and you can see a graph with the ranges of the ticket prices, and it might make more sense to fly a little earlier, a little later, stay a little longer, or a little bit less, and you can plan your trip from there. Additionally, when I'm on the internet, when I'm on these sites, there's 2 precautions. I say precautions is not really so much for safety, it's more to bypass. A lot of these sites, they tend to use cookies to track your location. So if you go multiple times to the same website and don't book until after a few visits, the tickets will actually raise in price, and that's because they're tracking your traffic visiting the website, and every time you don't buy the ticket, they want to instill that sense of urgency in you. So to bypass this, I use a VPN and I use a browser that is similar to Google's incognito mode, which doesn't allow the saving of any cookies. And between these 2, you can bypass their little sneaky tactics. So the VPN I use is called Proton VPN. There's a variety of choices out there. This is just the one I happen to sign up with. They all pretty much work. You want to set your location, the proxy location, to another country, so that there is less of a chance of them giving you a higher price than normal. So now I'm connected to my VPN. I'm gonna go ahead and open my incognito style browser. This one is called Komodo. I just found it just kind of by Googling, but there's many browsers that have the same purpose. We're gonna check out Skyscanner first for no reason in particular, because we're gonna be checking both at the same time. Obviously, you're gonna put in your local international airport. I'm based out of Miami, so I'm gonna put Miami here, and let's check out the London flight first. And our dates were February 27th to March the 9th. You also wanna click on Add Nearby Airports, because sometimes it's cheaper to fly in to what is not the main airport, but somewhere nearby the destination. So while that's loading up, I'm gonna go ahead and check out Skiplagged and enter the same information. And like I said, you're gonna have to go up here and change the currency to your local currency. We see this little graph at the top here. This will show you the peaks and valleys of the price ranges. And as you scroll along it, you'll see the date we picked is relatively low in comparison to other times of the year. There's some peaks up here, and these coincide with holidays, whether here or at the location you're visiting. And it looks pretty consistent for this whole week, so we'll leave the dates as is, and from here we'll scroll down and look at what kind of flights. Obviously, flights with more connections are going to be cheaper, but that's really on you whether you want some long layovers or multiple stops on your trip. Also depends on your budget. You can arrange this by price or by duration, so let's check out our cheapest flights here. So we see a similar price that we saw on Hit List, where we first got our leads for cheap destinations during these dates. We can see the airlines over here. This one has an hour-and-a-half layover, which isn't too bad in Toronto. And it seems like there are no direct flights in this cheap range. But just to double check, we're gonna click on duration. Okay, so we actually found some direct flights here for about $100 more, which isn't too bad. Here's a direct flight for that same price. So it helps to check both lists because the difference might be very small between the cheapest one and the most convenient one. So this is a pretty good deal for 350 bucks, direct flight across the pond on Virgin Airlines, which I hear is pretty good, having personally flown. So even though we found something pretty cheap here, just to double check, we're gonna go on to Skyscanner because sometimes one has deals that the other doesn't. Here we're finding a non-stop flight, so it's about $17 cheaper. I believe I'm looking at the price here correctly. So in this instance, even though Skyscanner doesn't give you as much information as far as the graph, it did give us a cheaper flight for $333. And that price is actually cheaper than what we found on Hitlist, which it was $404, I believe. For the sake of this test, we're gonna go check out the flights for Mexico City specifically. The price that we found on Hitlist was $354, and let's see what we can find on Skyscanner and Skiplagged. So looking at Skiplagged here, we see the same thing with the graph, and it's relatively consistent for this whole month here. So it seems like February is a cheap time to travel to London or Mexico City, or the fact that I'm looking 2 months in advance also helps with the low ticket prices. So this is pretty ridiculous. Look at this right here. We are sorting this by price, and obviously it's not gonna be as cheap if you're flying from somewhere further away, but there is a flight here for $166 to Mexico City, 3-hour, 40-minute flight. That is pretty insane. The price that we found, if you remember, on Hitlist was $354, so it's considerably less. The airline is not one I'm familiar with. It seems like it is a Mexican or at least South American airline. We see another one similarly priced here for $200, and that is a Mexican airline for sure. So to fly from Miami to Mexico City, I know it's not too far, but for $166 using this method and using Hitlist to find the leads for where to go, and then refining on Skyscanner and Skiplagged, it's a pretty good method. We're gonna check Skyscanner just in case. As you can see in this instance, we are finding the cheaper flights, and I believe this is the same airline. We're finding the cheaper flights on Skiplagged. So it's definitely worth checking both. And let me add that I will occasionally check Google Flights. Google Flights has a similar kind of calendar or graph, but I don't really trust Google Flights because it's usually linked to your Google account. Even if you log out, I just don't want to bother with that, and these are pretty unbiased websites for checking. So moving on, when you arrive to your location, you're gonna have to find a place to stay. There are the obvious options, the hotels and Airbnbs, though these tend to be more pricey. I lean towards hostels, and depending on what the location is, camping in Iceland, in some places by the national parks, camping is preferred. You can rent an RV, or you can just rent a tent on site. For example, when I went to Glacier National Park, I don't have my own camping equipment, and I wouldn't fly out with my camping equipment because it's gonna make you have to carry probably an extra check bag or less video gear, which is the important stuff that we wanna bring. So in Glacier, I found a place that rents camping gear, tents, sleeping bags, everything you need, and it's pretty decently priced. From there, you just have to make sure you book your campgrounds in advance. In the summer, at the national parks, definitely anything that you book as far as campgrounds better be 3 to 6 months in advance because those fill up quickly in summer. For hostels, I usually go on hostelworld.com. They have a pretty good listing, though some countries have hostels that aren't listed on Hostelworld, so I'll actually go through Google Maps and just click on the area, type in hostels, and you'll find some that are not listed on that main directory, and they usually go through booking.com or something similar, and you actually might find some cheaper deals there too. Airbnbs, obviously, you go to the Airbnb website, depending on if you want a shared room, a room in a shared house. Some of these Airbnbs I've seen in Europe, like in Norway, they run them like hostels, but they're Airbnb prices. So you kind of have to look around and depending on your budget, but I usually go for hostels if I'm traveling anywhere in Europe or South America. So you've arrived at your location and you need to get around. As a photographer, what offers the most flexibility is renting a car and getting to your locations either early in the morning or staying late after sunset. Maybe even if you're shooting Milky Way or astrophotography or the Northern Lights, you're gonna have to stay there late into the night. So for photographers, it doesn't really work to take these planned out tours. I know some people like just the comfort of booking things and letting all the logistics be handled for them. But if you want quality images, you're gonna have to do the work yourself. So I usually use kayak.com. You'll find most countries have all their hertzes and avis and budget and Alamo all listed on kayak.com. You can compare prices, whether you need a bigger vehicle, whether you need an off-road vehicle, whatever you need for the place that you're visiting. And then like the plane tickets, you want to book those well in advance. So when it comes to insurance, when you're booking, you're most likely booking with a credit card. You definitely should be. And your credit card will most likely have the CDW built in to your purchases. It's the base protection that's given to the rental vehicle. So if you're driving and you hit something or any damage to the vehicle, basically is the CDW. Your credit card will have that by default. So when you're filling out the paperwork, you have to make sure the CDW is opted out or not accepted, because under my credit card, under most credit cards, their policy is that if you accept the CDW from the rental car company, it disqualifies you from the credit card protection, and plus you're paying some extra amounts per day. Certain countries have different rules about liability. Most people's car insurance will cover them for liability, especially in the United States, and then individual countries require more or less. For example, I'm booking my Costa Rica trip, or I was booking my Costa Rica trip recently, and my car insurance policy specifically does not cover the country of Costa Rica. You're gonna have to call them or maybe look at the fine print on their website. And the rental car company that I'm renting the car from requires, and this is in the fine print, I didn't actually find out until I did some research, and they would have surprised me on site, which is another thing that rental car companies do, requires that you have liability purchased through them or proof from your car insurance that you have liability, which, as I mentioned, I didn't have coverage in Costa Rica. So looking at the price that I found on Kayak, I mentally added the amount that they charge per day for that size vehicle for the liability, and there's pretty much no way around it. I'll probably make a separate video about rental cars in Iceland, but Iceland has a similar kind of system, especially because there's off-roads, there's questionable quality of roads during the winter or the fall or wherever there's snow, so they require you to have some gravel or wind protection, and that's for another video, but Iceland is a little more complicated in that way. Another little rental car hack that I want to add, and I actually found out this recently when I was booking my Costa Rica car rental, is that if you're renting around holiday dates, whatever rate you are given at the start of your rental, whether it's a week or 10 days, they will maintain that same rate for the whole duration of your rental. Kind of makes sense. So if you're renting during some peak or high season and it's $50, $70, $100 a day, it's going to be $1,000 or $700 or whatever it is for the entire duration. While I was changing around my reservation and I wanted to change for an off-road vehicle halfway through my trip because I'm going to be visiting some off-roads or difficult roads, as Costa Rica is known for, I found out that if I return my vehicle from the first half of the trip and pick up a 4x4 vehicle, which was actually more expensive when I was first looking at it, because it is after the peak season, which was right after Christmas before New Year's, the rates were dramatically lower. Like less than half, I believe. I don't remember the exact amount, but it was less than half. So the amount I'm paying for my first 4 to 5 days is double what I'm paying for the second half of the trip. Little hack that I found out, and of course it's only convenient if you're going to be driving past the airport onto another part of the country, which is what I'm doing, going from the Caribbean coast to the West Coast. Regarding food on a budget, it really depends what country you're visiting. For example, Iceland, incredibly expensive at even the gas station restaurants. So what I did there was similar to what I did when I went on my camping trip to Glacier National Park. Buy a lot of canned food, stay at a hostel or an Airbnb one of the first nights, and batch cook, prep a bunch of stuff, put it in Tupperware, get a cooler, and depending if you're going to be somewhere where it's warm outside or it's cold, in Iceland, you don't really need to put ice in the cooler because it's pretty much cold enough to keep the food from spoiling. And just stock up on some stuff, depending if you're going to be doing long drives. Really depends on your destination. And you can bypass a lot of the high-cost restaurant bills that you would ordinarily run into. You buy a little camping stove, the actual propane canister you can rent on site and heat up your food that way. Really depends how budget you want to go, but when I can, I try to avoid eating in restaurants when I'm traveling, especially in expensive countries. On the other hand, if you're going somewhere like South America, it's actually remarkably cheap. South America or Asia, from what I hear, which I haven't been to yet. It's actually remarkably cheap to eat at at least local level eateries, not some high-end restaurants, and that'll handle a large portion of your costs as far as food goes. And like I mentioned, if you're staying at a hostel and Airbnb, there'll usually be a kitchen, or you can check the listing to see if they have a kitchen for guests to use, and you can just go hit the supermarket and eat well and cook your food. So it really depends where you're visiting, but those are some tips that'll take care of you for those kind of situations. That wraps up my budget travel photography tips as far as booking tickets, transportation, lodging, and food. If you have any advice or any ideas that you have discovered, let me know in the comments. If you have any questions, if you want me to elaborate on some things, also leave the questions in the comments. Hope you're enjoying this new material. I'm starting to put out small segments and small pieces of my large travel photography videos in case people have not the attention span to watch a 30-minute segment and just want some quick little tidbits here and there. So I'll catch you guys on the next one.